You've seen Casino. You've watched Joe Pesci's character Nikki Santoro get beaten with baseball bats and buried alive in a cornfield. You've watched Robert De Niro's Sam Rothstein run the casinos like an emperor. You've watched Sharon Stone's Ginger destroy everything with her addiction and chaos. You think you know this story. You don't. Because the real story? The movie actually made it nicer. The real Tony Spilotro was more violent than Joe Pesci showed. More sadistic, more reckless. The movie had to tone down his actual murders because audiences wouldn't believe how brutal they really were. The real Frank Rosenthal was smarter than Robert De Niro's character. His mathematical genius was almost supernatural. He could memorize thousands of statistics and calculate odds in his head that would take computers minutes to process. And the real Jerry McGee? More tragic, more complex, and more damaged than even Sharon Stone's Oscar-nominated performance could capture. The real ending? More brutal, more sudden, more final. Martin Scorsese is one of the greatest directors who ever lived. Casino is a masterpiece. But even Scorsese, even in a 3-hour movie, had to compress, simplify, and soften the truth. He had to change names for legal reasons. He had to combine characters. He had to make it fit a narrative structure. I don't have those limitations. This is what actually happened. Every name, every date, every murder. All real, all documented. All verified through FBI files, court transcripts, coroner reports, and first-hand accounts. Before we dive in, I need you to do something. Drop a comment right now telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I want to see how far this story reaches across the world. Just type your city and the time. Do it now while you're thinking about it. Hit subscribe if you like deep. Research true crime that actually respects your intelligence. This channel is for you. No fluff, no speculation, just documented truth. And like this video right now, the algorithm needs to know this is valuable content worth sharing. This is 3 hours of the complete story of how the mob controlled Las Vegas, made hundreds of millions of dollars, and then lost everything. How 3 people, a genius, a showgirl, and a killer, built an empire and watched it collapse into violence and tragedy. If you haven't seen the movie Casino, that's fine. This story stands completely on its own. But if you have seen it, prepare to have your understanding completely transformed by what really happened. Let's begin with the man who built it all. The mathematical genius who could have been a billionaire running casinos legitimately, but chose the criminal path instead. Frank Lefty Rosenthal. Frank Lawrence Rosenthal was born on June 12, 1929, in Chicago, Illinois. Not in some glamorous neighborhood, not in wealth. His parents were working-class Jewish immigrants trying to make it in Depression-era America. And here's the first important detail. He was Jewish, not Italian. This matters enormously for everything that comes later. The Italian Mafia, the Chicago outfit, the families in New York, all of organized crime's power structure was built on Italian heritage and blood relationships. Being Jewish meant Rosenthal could never be a made member of the Mafia. He could never take the oath. He could never be protected by the same code that protected Italian mobsters. He would always be an outsider working for the insiders. Remember this, it shapes his entire story. As a child, Frank Rosenthal discovered something extraordinary about himself. He had what psychologists call an eidetic memory, a photographic memory. But more than that, he had an almost supernatural ability with numbers. By age 13, he was already handicapping horse races. Let me explain what that means in simple terms. A handicapper is someone who predicts the outcomes of sporting events using statistics and analysis. It's not gambling based on luck. It's mathematical calculation. Imagine you're betting on a race. Most people look at the horse's name, maybe check if it won last time, and make a guess. Frank Rosenthal would memorize every race that horse had ever run, every jockey it had ridden with, the weather conditions of each race, the track surfaces, the competition, the betting patterns, the ownership changes, everything. Then he'd do the same for every other horse in the race. Then he'd calculate the actual probability of each outcome. And he could do this in his head, in minutes, with accuracy that exceeded the professional odds makers at the tracks. At 13 years old, by the time he was 16, he dropped out of high school, not because he was struggling, because school was a waste of his time. He was already making more money handicapping races than his teachers made in a year. Through the late 1940s and into the 1950s, Rosenthal built a reputation as one of the best handicappers in the country. He wasn't just betting on horse races. He expanded into all sports: baseball, football, basket, tball, anything that could be bet on. He could calculate the odds better than almost anyone alive. And he kept winning. This created a problem. Casinos and bookmakers hate people who consistently win. Gambling is designed so the house always has an edge. When someone like Rosenthal comes along and actually beats the system through pure skill, they become a threat. He was banned from multiple betting establishments. They'd take his money when he lost, but refuse his bets when they realized who he was. So Rosenthal did what smart people do when one door closes. He found another way in. The Chicago outfit was the organized crime syndicate that controlled Chicago. It was one of the most powerful mafia families in America, with connections to every major city and influence reaching into unions, politics, police departments, and legitimate businesses. And they noticed this young Jewish kid who was making serious money using mathematics to beat the sports betting system. They approached him with a proposition. Work for us. Use your skills to make U.S. money. We'll protect you, give you resources, and you'll earn more than you ever could on your own. Rosenthal agreed. This decision changed everything. Now he wasn't just handicapping games and betting on them. He was fixing them. The outfit had connections to athletes, coaches, referees. They could influence outcomes. And with Rosenthal's mathematical mind, calculating exactly which games to fix and how much to bet, they created a money printing machine. But fixing games is extremely illegal. It's not just gambling. It's fraud, conspiracy, bribery, corruption. The FBI was already watching the mob. And they were watching sports betting, specifically because it generated so much cash. In 1961, Frank Rosenthal was arrested for bribing college basketball players to fix games. This should have been the end of his story. Federal charges, evidence of conspiracy, potential for serious prison time. But the Chicago outfit had connections in places that mattered. Lawyers, judges, prosecutors, who owed favors or could be pressured. The charges were reduced. Rosenthal avoided serious jail time, however. He was now permanently on the FBI's radar. They had a file on him. They knew he was connected to organized crime. They'd be watching him for the rest of his life. He needed to leave Chicago. Start fresh somewhere the FBI wasn't watching as closely. He needed Las Vegas. To understand why Rosenthal ended up in Las Vegas, you need to understand what Las Vegas was in the late 1960s. On the surface, it was a booming tourist destination. Casinos were making billions of dollars. Frank Sinatra performed there. Elvis had his residency. It was glamorous, exciting. The entertainment capital of America. Underneath, it was completely controlled by organized crime. Here's how it worked. Nevada legalized gambling in 1931. Decades before any other state, this created a unique opportunity. You could build a casino, operate it legally, and make enormous profits. But building and running a casino required massive amounts of capital, millions of dollars. In the 1940s and 1950s, most legitimate banks wouldn't loan money for gambling operations. It was considered too risky, too controversial. So mobsters stepped in with the capital. They provided the money to build casinos. In return, they owned them, secretly on paper. Casinos were owned by various businessmen with clean records. In reality, they were owned by mob families from different cities. Chicago controlled several casinos. New York families controlled others. Kansas City had their casinos. Cleveland had theirs. The casinos made enormous profits, all legal. Tourists came, gambled, lost money. And the casinos reported their earnings to the government and paid taxes. But the mob wasn't satisfied with legal profits. They invented something called the skim. Let me explain the skim in the simplest possible terms. Imagine you run a lemonade stand. You sell 100 cups of lemonade at $1 each. You made $100. But before you count the money officially and tell your parents, you take $20 out of the cash box and hide it in your pocket. Then you count what's left, $80, and that's what you report, the missing $20. It was never officially counted. It doesn't exist on paper. You pay no taxes on it. It's pure profit that only you know about. Now scale that up to casinos making millions of dollars a day, every night. Before the casino counting rooms officially tallied the earnings, mobsters would take cash out. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash, untraceable. This money was put in suitcases and driven or flown back to the mob bosses in Chicago, Kansas City, Cleveland, and other cities. The casinos would report earnings of, say, $10 million for the month. The actual earnings might have been $15 million. The missing $5 million was the skim. Pure profit, no taxes, no paper trail. This was generating tens of millions of dollars annually for organized crime families. But they had a problem. They needed someone smart enough to run the casinos efficiently and maximize profits. Someone trustworthy enough not to steal from them. Someone skilled enough to avoid getting caught. Frank Rosenthal was perfect. Frank Rosenthal arrived in Las Vegas in 1968. He was 39 years old, already wealthy from his sports betting operations, and ready to build something bigger. The Chicago outfit gave him a job. Run our casinos. Make as much money as possible. Skim profits for us. Don't get caught. There was one massive problem. To legally work in a casino, you needed a gaming license from the Nevada Gaming Commission. This license required extensive background checks. They investigated your criminal history, your associates, your finances, everything. Rosenthal had multiple arrests on his record. He had documented connections to organized crime. He'd been caught fixing games. There was zero chance he'd get a gaming license, so they created a fiction, officially. Rosenthal was employed as Director of Food and Beverage at the Stardust Casino. This was a joke title. He didn't manage restaurants or bars. He ran everything. All casino operations, all security, all hiring and firing, all financial decisions. Everyone knew it. The Nevada Gaming Commission knew it. The FBI knew it. But as long as his official title was something that didn't require a gaming license, they couldn't legally stop him. This arrangement was completely illegal, but proving it was nearly impossible. The Stardust's official managers would claim they made all the decisions. Rosenthal was just a food and beverage consultant. The paper trail was carefully constructed to hide the truth. And Rosenthal got to work. Frank Rosenthal didn't just run the Stardust Casino. He revolutionized it. Remember, this man had a genius-level mathematical mind. He understood probability, statistics, and human behavior at a level that few people in the world could match. He applied all of this knowledge to making the casino more profitable. He changed the entire layout of the casino floor. Most casinos at the time arranged their slot machines and gaming tables based on tradition or aesthetics. Rosenthal used mathematics. He calculated traffic patterns where people naturally walked, where they paused, where they made impulsive decisions. He placed the most profitable games in the spots where people were most likely to play them. High-variance slot machines near the entrances where tourists just arriving still had full wallets. Lower volatility games near the exits, where people who'd been losing might make one last bet. He revolutionized sports betting in Las Vegas. Before Rosenthal, sports books were small operations in the backs of casinos. Rosenthal understood that sports betting could be huge if done right. He created the modern Las Vegas sportsbook. Large rooms with dozens of screens showing every game. Comfortable seating, professional odds makers, and betting on every sport imaginable. This brought in a completely new category of customer. Sports bettors who might not play table games or slots would come specifically for the sportsbook. And while they were there, they'd gamble on other things too. He improved security systems to catch cheaters and card counters. He hired the best dealers and trained them extensively. He created customer service protocols that made high rollers feel special and want to return. Within 3 years, the Stardust went from a struggling mid-tier casino to one of the most profitable casinos in Las Vegas. And the Skim? It was enormous. Estimates suggest the Chicago outfit was taking between $2 and $4 million per MONTH in Skim from the Stardust alone during the peak years. In today's money, that's roughly $5 to $10 million per month, $60 to $100 million per year. In untaxed cash, the Chicago bosses were ecstatic. Rosenthal was making them richer than they'd ever been. By 1974, Rosenthal's success at the Stardust led to him taking control of multiple casinos simultaneously. The Stardust, the Fremont, the Hacienda, and the Marina all operated under his direction. He was managing more gambling revenue than any single person in Las Vegas. He was living the dream. Mansion in an exclusive neighborhood. Multiple luxury cars, power, respect, money flowing in constantly. But Frank Rosenthal had a fatal flaw. He wasn't satisfied with the reality of his power. He wanted recognition. He wanted people to know how smart he was, how important he was. His desire would destroy everything. To understand Frank Rosenthal, you need to understand a fundamental contradiction in his personality. On one hand, he was brilliant at what he did. Mathematical genius, strategic thinker, able to manage complex operations with precision. He could have been a legitimate casino executive, a CEO of a major corporation, a billionaire through legal means. But he loved the criminal element. He loved knowing he was smarter than the FBI. He loved the edge, the danger, the secret knowledge that he was running illegal operations right under the government's nose. He was also a perfectionist to the point of obsession. He would fire employees over tiny mistakes. He'd notice if a roulette table was 1 degree off level. He'd catch accounting errors of a few $100s in operations handling millions. This attention to detail made him excellent at his job. It also made him difficult to work with. He had very few real friends. He trusted almost no one. He was suspicious, paranoid, constantly watching for betrayal, and he was arrogant. He knew he was the smartest person in almost any room. He couldn't help letting people know it. This arrogance would become a massive problem. The mob's most basic rule, taught by Lucky Luciano decades earlier, was stay invisible, make money quietly. Don't attract attention. The moment you become famous, the moment law enforcement focuses on you, you're finished. Frank Rosenthal couldn't follow this rule. He wanted to be famous. He wanted recognition for his genius. This brings us to one of the most insane decisions he ever made. In 1977, while secretly running multiple casinos for the mob, while skimming millions of dollars, while under FBI investigation, Frank Rosenthal started his own television show. The Frank Rosenthal Show aired on local Las Vegas television. Rosenthal was the host. He interviewed celebrities. sports stars, and entertainers, he promoted his casinos indirectly. Since officially he didn't run them, he became a local celebrity. This was absolutely insane. The entire point of his position was to stay hidden. The Chicago outfit needed him to be invisible, to run the operations quietly, to avoid any attention that might bring FBI scrutiny. Instead, he was on television every week. His face was on promotional materials. He was becoming famous in Las Vegas as a personality, an entertainer, a public figure. The FBI couldn't believe their luck. They were investigating him for illegal casino operations, and he was literally putting himself on television, making it easier to track his activities and associates. The Chicago bosses were furious. They ordered him to stop. He kept doing it. He believed his genius made him untouchable. He thought he could have it both ways, run the illegal operations and be a public figure. This hubris, this arrogance, this desperate need for recognition was creating massive problems. But before those problems destroyed him, he made another decision that would prove even more catastrophic. He married Jerry McGee in 1969. Frank Rosenthal met Geraldine Geri McGee at a casino where she worked. He was immediately, completely, obsessively attracted to her. She was beautiful, genuinely beautiful, not just pretty. She was one of the most stunning women in a city full of beautiful women. She was smart, charming, knew how to talk to powerful men, knew how to make them feel special. For Rosenthal, she represented everything he thought he deserved. He was successful, powerful, wealthy. He needed the perfect trophy wife to complete his image. For Jerry, Rosenthal represented security, money, stability, escape from the hustling life she'd been living. But she didn't love him, not the way he loved her. And she was honest about this from the beginning. She told him straight out, "I don't love you the way you love me." Rosenthal didn't care. He believed he could make her love him. He believed that his money, his power, his intelligence would eventually win her over. This was his second fatal mistake. The first was seeking fame. The second was marrying a woman who didn't love him and thinking he could control the situation through money and power. Before we get deeper into their relationship, we need to understand who Geri McGee really was, because her story is its own tragedy, separate from Rosenthal's, and it helps explain why their marriage was doomed from the start. Geraldine McGee was born on May 16, 1936, in Los Angeles, California. Her childhood was difficult in ways that shaped everything about who she became. Her parents divorced when she was young. This was the 1940s, when divorce carried serious social stigma and single mothers faced economic hardship that's hard to imagine today. Her mother struggled to support her. They lived in poverty. Not romantic poverty, real poverty, the kind where you don't know if there's food tomorrow. Geri learned early that she had one asset that could change her circumstances: her looks. By 14, she was already stunning, not conventionally pretty, genuinely beautiful in a way that made people stop and stare. And she understood, with the survival instinct of someone who grew up with nothing, that this beauty was valuable. It could be traded for security, for food, for escape from poverty. At 16 or 17, the exact age is disputed in different sources, she left Los Angeles and headed to Las Vegas. This was the late 1950s. Las Vegas was booming. Showgirls were stars. Beautiful women could make money, real money, in ways that weren't possible in other cities. She had one skill: her looks. She needed to make that skill work. To understand Geri's life in Las Vegas, you need to understand what being a showgirl actually meant in the 1950s and 1960s. On the surface, showgirls were performers. They danced in elaborate stage productions. They wore incredible costumes, feathers, sequins, barely anything at all. They were famous, glamorous, photographed, admired. People came to Vegas specifically to see the showgirl reviews. But there was another layer underneath. Many showgirls also worked as casino hostesses. This meant accompanying wealthy gamblers, entertaining them, making them feel special, encouraging them to stay and gamble more. The line between entertainment and prostitution was intentionally blurry. Some showgirls were purely performers. Some were essentially escorts who also performed. Some moved back and forth depending on the money being offered. The casinos encouraged this. High-rolling gamblers would request specific girls to spend time with them. The girls would receive tips, sometimes hundreds or thousands of dollars for their company. The casino looked the other way because these high rollers would gamble tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars while being entertained. It was semi-legal prostitution mixed with legitimate entertainment, and everyone involved, the casinos, the girls, the customers, the police understood the arrangement and accepted it as part of Vegas culture. Geri McGee became one of the top showgirls in this system. She performed in shows at multiple casinos. She was beautiful enough to be featured prominently, but her real talent was hustling wealthy men. Geri developed a system for extracting money from wealthy gamblers. It wasn't crude or obvious. It was sophisticated psychological manipulation. She would identify wealthy men at the casinos, usually tourists, businessmen, married men from other cities who came to Vegas to gamble and escape their regular lives. She'd befriend them, make them feel special, interesting, attractive, laugh at their jokes, listen to their stories, make them believe she genuinely enjoyed their company. These men would give her money, jewelry, gifts. They'd buy her clothes, pay her rent, give her cash tips for spending time with them. Some sources suggest she was making thousands of dollars a week in the early 1960s, an enormous amount at that time. The key to her success was emotional distance. She never got attached. She saw these relationships as transactions. Man provides money and gifts. She provides companionship and the illusion of affection. When the money stopped or a better opportunity appeared, she moved on without guilt. She was surviving. She'd grown up in poverty, had no education, no skills except her beauty. This was her way out. Vegas was full of women trying to do the same thing, but Geri was exceptionally good at it. She was also building a reputation. The other showgirls knew her. The casino managers knew her. The wealthy regulars knew her. She became known as a money magnet, the girl who could extract cash from any man who was interested. But there was a problem. A man named Lenny Marmor. Sometime in the early 1960s, Geri met Lenny Marmor. The exact circumstances are unclear, but what's documented is the relationship that developed. Lenny Marmor was a small-time hustler, a con man, and functionally a pimp. He wasn't running a traditional prostitution operation, but he would send Geri to work wealthy men and take a cut of her earnings. The relationship was toxic in every possible way. He was abusive, physically and emotionally. He was addicted to drugs. He was manipulative, controlling and exploitative. But Geri loved him, or thought she loved him, or was trauma-bonded to him in ways she couldn't break free from. The psychological dynamics of abusive relationships are complex, but the result was clear. She couldn't leave him, no matter how much he hurt her. In 1958, she had a daughter with him, Robin Marmor. This child tied her to Lenny even more permanently. Lenny would disappear for weeks, using drugs and running scams. Then he'd return, and Geri would take him back. He'd beat her, steal from her, send her to make money while he did nothing, and she'd stay. Everyone around her could see that Lenny was destroying her, but she couldn't see it, or couldn't act on it, or was too damaged to break free. This pattern, being attracted to dangerous, abusive men who hurt her, would define her entire life. When Geri met Frank Rosenthal in 1969, she was in her early 30s, still beautiful, but not getting younger. She knew her value in the Vegas showgirl market was declining. She needed security. Rosenthal was different from her usual marks. He wasn't a tourist passing through. He was actually powerful, not just wealthy but connected, influential, running major operations. He was intelligent in a way that impressed her, and most importantly, he was genuinely falling in love with her. Most of the men Jerry hustled wanted sex and company, nothing deeper. Rosenthal wanted a wife, a partner. He wanted to marry her, have a family with her, build a life together. For Jerry, this was the ultimate score. If she could get Rosenthal to marry her, she'd have permanent security, money forever, social status, legitimacy. She could stop hustling, but she didn't love him. She was still in love with Lenny. Despite everything Lenny had done to her, she was honest with Rosenthal about this. She told him she didn't love him the way he loved her. She told him she was still involved with Lenny. Rosenthal's response was essentially, "I don't care. I love you enough for both of us. I'll make you love me. I'll give you everything." This was doomed from the start. You cannot make someone love you through money and gifts. You cannot replace their emotional attachment to someone else by being smart and successful. Love doesn't work that way. But Rosenthal couldn't see this. His arrogance, the same arrogance that made him believe he could beat the FBI and be famous while running illegal operations, made him believe he could solve the Jerry problem through force of will and resources. Frank Rosenthal and Jerry McGee were married in 1969. The wedding was lavish, expensive, everything Jerry had never had growing up in poverty. Rosenthal was ecstatic. He had the perfect wife to match his growing success, beautiful enough to turn heads everywhere they went, charming enough to impress his associates. She was the final piece of the image he was building. Jerry was pragmatic about it. This was the best deal she was going to get. Better than hustling tourists. Better than being dependent on Lenny, who gave her nothing but abuse. She brought her daughter Robin into the marriage. Rosenthal accepted Robin as his own, which was generous. Then they had 2 children together, Stephen, born in 1970, and Stephanie, born in 1971. From the outside, they looked like a perfect Vegas power couple. He was running the most profitable casinos in the city. She was beautiful and glamorous. They had 3 children. They lived in a mansion. They attended the best parties. They were photographed at premieres and sporting events. From the inside, it was a disaster waiting to happen. The fundamental problem was simple. Rosenthal loved Jerry more than she loved him. He knew it. She knew it. Everyone around them knew it. Rosenthal's response to this imbalance was to try to control her through money. He gave her everything materially, clothes, jewelry, cars, anything she wanted. But he also controlled everything. Joint bank accounts that he monitored obsessively. He tracked her movements. He was jealous and suspicious and possessive. This created a vicious cycle. The more he tried to control her, the more trapped she felt. The more trapped she felt. The more she wanted to escape, the more she tried to escape. The more controlling he became, and she had a specific escape in mind. Lenny Marmor. Jerry had always drunk alcohol. Most people in the Vegas entertainment world did, but in the early 1970s, her drinking increased from social to problematic to alcoholic. She started drinking during the day. She'd drink entire bottles of vodka. She'd show up at casinos noticeably intoxicated. She'd get into screaming fights with Frank in public. She also started using pills, painkillers, sedatives, whatever she could get from doctors who were happy to prescribe for the wife of Frank Rosenthal. The combination of alcohol and pills created a dangerous spiral. Why was she drinking? Multiple reasons. She felt trapped in a marriage with a man she didn't really love. She felt guilty about the children, knowing she wasn't a good mother. She missed the freedom of her showgirl days, the excitement, the danger, and she was still seeing Lenny Marmor secretly, despite being married to Rosenthal, despite having children, despite having everything she'd ever wanted materially. Jerry couldn't break her attachment to Lenny. She'd sneak away to meet him. She'd give him money from the accounts Rosenthal controlled. She'd disappear for days at a time on benders with Lenny, drinking, using drugs, living the chaotic life she claimed to have left behind. Rosenthal knew, or strongly suspected. He'd hire private investigators to follow her. They'd report back that she was meeting Lenny at motels, at bars, in apartments around Vegas. But what could Rosenthal do? He couldn't make her stop loving Lenny. He couldn't force her to love him instead. The children suffered through all of this. Robin, who wasn't biologically Rosenthal's, was caught in the middle. Stephen and Stephanie watched their parents scream at each other, watched their mother disappear, watched their father become more controlling and angry. The household was chaotic, dysfunctional, increasingly desperate. It's easy to judge Jerry McGee harshly. She cheated on her husband. She was an alcoholic. She abandoned her children during her drug benders. She manipulated Rosenthal for money while loving another man. All of this is true, but she was also a victim of her circumstances in ways that are important to understand. She grew up in poverty with no father, no support system, no education. She learned as a teenager that her body was the only asset she had. She survived by using that asset in a city designed to exploit beautiful women. She fell in love with an abusive drug addict when she was young and vulnerable. That relationship damaged her in ways she never recovered from. She married for security, not love, which meant the marriage was hollow from the start. She had 3 children, but was never given the tools or support to be a good mother. She was trapped between the life she'd left, hustling in chaos, and the life she had, wealth without happiness. And she was an addict. Addiction is a disease. It's not a moral failing. It changes your brain chemistry. It makes you do things you wouldn't normally do. It destroys your ability to make good decisions. Geri McGee was not a villain. She was a tragedy. She was a woman with limited options, who made the best choices she could given her circumstances. And those choices led to pain for herself and everyone around her. Sharon Stone's performance in Casino captures this perfectly. She shows Jerry as beautiful and charming and desperate and addicted and trapped all at the same time. It's one of the most nuanced portrayals of addiction and dysfunctional relationships in film history. The real Jerry was all of those things Stone portrayed, and more damaged, more manipulative, more trapped, more tragic, and her story was heading toward a terrible ending. But before we get there, we need to meet the third person in this triangle, the man who would destroy everything, Tony Spilotro. Anthony John Spilotro was born on May 19, 1938. In Chicago, Illinois, he grew up in an Italian neighborhood on the West Side, in a community where organized crime wasn't hidden. It was part of the fabric of daily life. His nickname was the Ant, not because he was industrious like an ant, because he was short, 5 feet 2 inches tall, as an adult, tiny. Even by 1930s standards, when people were generally shorter, you might think being small would make someone cautious, defensive, trying to avoid fights. Tony Spilotro was the opposite, from a very young age. He was extraordinarily violent. His first arrest was at age 14 for assault, not a schoolyard fight. Assault, meaning he hurt someone badly enough that police got involved and filed charges. Other kids in the neighborhood learned quickly. Don't mess with Tony. He didn't just fight. He hurt people. He'd use weapons. Brass knuckles, pipes, bats, chains. He'd keep hitting long after the fight was over. He seemed to enjoy causing pain. This wasn't normal teenage aggression. This was something darker, sadism, a genuine pleasure in watching people suffer. The Chicago outfit noticed him. In mob culture, every neighborhood has street guys, young men who do the dirty work. Beatings, intimidation, collections. The outfit was always looking for effective enforcers. Tony Spilotro, despite being barely 5 feet tall, was terrifyingly effective in his late teens and early 20s. Spilotro became an apprentice to senior members of the Chicago outfit. He learned the business, loan sharking, bookmaking, extortion, robbery, but his real talent was violence. When someone owed money and wouldn't pay, Spilotro would convince them. When someone was cooperating with police, Spilotro would handle them. When the outfit needed to send a message, Spilotro delivered that message in blood. By the early 1960s, he was suspected in multiple murders. Police knew he was a killer. They just couldn't prove it. Witnesses would disappear or refuse to testify. Evidence would vanish. The outfit protected their valuable assets. And Spilotro was becoming very valuable. He was smart despite his violence. He understood the business side of crime. He could run operations, manage crews, and make money through illegal enterprises. But he was always happiest when he was hurting people. Then came the M&M murders. This is where Tony Spilotro showed the world exactly who he was. Warning: the following section describes extreme violence. It's historically documented and essential to understanding this story. But it is deeply disturbing. In 1962, two small-time thieves named Billy McCarthy and Jimmy Miraglia made a catastrophic mistake. They robbed and killed two men who were connected to the Chicago outfit. You need to understand the mob's hierarchy. There are made members, officially inducted members of the organization, who've taken an oath and are protected by the organization. Then there are associates, people who work with the mob but aren't officially members. Then there are civilians, regular people. The rule is absolute. You don't kill made members without permission from the bosses. If you do, you've signed your own death warrant. McCarthy and Miraglia killed two made members, thinking they were just robbing random guys. When the outfit found out, they ordered an execution. But not just an execution, an example. Something so brutal that no one would ever make this mistake again. They gave the job to Tony Spilotro. What happened next is one of the most brutal murders in organized crime history. Multiple sources confirm the details. FBI reports, witness testimony. Spilotro's crew members, who later cooperated with authorities. Spilotro and his crew kidnapped both McCarthy and Miraglia. They took them to a basement. What followed was hours of torture. They beat them with fists, baseball bats, and metal pipes. They put their heads in a vise, a metal device that squeezes, and slowly tightened it, crushing their skulls while they were still alive. They stabbed them repeatedly. They burned them with cigarettes and blowtorches. They cut off body parts, all while keeping them conscious and aware. The whole point was to make them feel everything, to make them suffer as long as possible before they died. Finally, after hours of this, they killed them and buried their bodies in an Indiana cornfield. This is the real story behind the famous head in a vice scene in Casino. The movie version, as brutal as it is actually toned down from what really happened. The real torture lasted longer and was more savage than Scorsese could show on film. Why such extreme violence? Two reasons. First, to send a message. The outfit wanted everyone in Chicago's criminal underworld to know, this is what happens if you kill our members without permission. The brutality was intentional. It was meant to terrify. Second, and more disturbing, Tony Spilotro enjoyed it. Multiple sources confirm this. He was sadistic. He liked hurting people. Other mobsters were violent when they had to be. As part of the business, Spilotro was violent because he liked it. This made him valuable to the outfit, but it also made him dangerous and unpredictable. You could point him at a problem, and he'd solve it violently. But you couldn't always control how violent he'd be, or when he'd stop. Through the 1960s, Tony Spilotro became one of the Chicago outfit's top enforcers. He was suspected in more than 25 murders, and that's a conservative estimate. Some sources suggest the number was closer to 40 or 50. The FBI knew he was a serial killer. They had him under surveillance. They interviewed witnesses. But they could never build a case strong enough to prosecute. People were too terrified to testify. Evidence disappeared. Bodies weren't found. Spilotro was smart about his murders. He varied his methods. He hid bodies well. He never left witnesses alive if he could help it. He was a professional killer who got better with practice. By 1970, he was an extremely valuable asset to the Chicago bosses. But he was also a problem. He was too violent, too unpredictable, too attention-seeking. He was bringing heat police scrutiny, FBI attention, media coverage. The outfit needed him, but also needed him out of Chicago. The solution? Send him to Las Vegas. The Chicago bosses were making millions from their casino skim operations in Vegas. They needed someone there to protect their interests. Someone who could intimidate potential informants. Someone who could handle problems violently, if needed. Someone who would be loyal to Chicago. Tony Spilotro was perfect for this assignment. In 1971, at age 33, Spilotro moved to Las Vegas with his wife Nancy and their adopted son Vincent. On the surface, they looked like a normal family relocating for work. Nancy believed Tony was a businessman with some vague criminal connections, but didn't know the full truth. The truth was that Chicago had just sent a serial killer to Las Vegas to protect their gambling empire. Initially, Tony Spilotro did his job exactly as intended. He was Chicago's representative in Vegas. His official role was to watch over the casino operations, protect the skim, and handle any problems that arose. His real job was simpler. Intimidate anyone who might talk to the FBI. Make sure no one interfered with the money flow. Use violence when necessary. He worked closely with Frank Rosenthal. They'd known each other from Chicago. They grew up in nearby neighborhoods and had been friendly for years. Rosenthal ran the casinos, the brains. Spilotro provided protection, the muscle. It was a perfect partnership. Rosenthal was brilliant with numbers and operations, but couldn't personally enforce anything. He wasn't violent and had no crew. Spilotro couldn't run legitimate businesses, but was excellent at violence and intimidation. Together, they made the operation work smoothly. The casinos made money. The skim flowed to Chicago. Problems were solved quietly, but Spilotro had a fundamental character flaw. He was greedy, and he couldn't follow orders. Tony Spilotro's job generated steady income from the Chicago outfit. He received a salary for protecting the casino operation. It was good money, thousands of dollars a week, but it wasn't enough for him. He saw all the money flowing through Vegas, the casinos, the tourists, the businesses, and he wanted more. So he started his own criminal enterprises. Without Chicago's permission, this violated the fundamental rules of organized crime. You don't run authorized operations. Everything goes through the bosses. Spilotro created a crew that became known as the Hole-in-the-Wall Gang. The name came from their preferred burglary method. Here's how they operated. They'd identify a target, a jewelry store, a fur retailer, any business with valuable merchandise and weak security. They'd scout the location, learning the layout, the alarm systems, the police patrol patterns. Then, in the middle of the night, they'd break into the adjacent building, using power tools. They'd cut a hole through the shared wall, sometimes through concrete, sometimes through drywall. Whatever separated their entry point from the target, they'd crawl through the hole, loot everything valuable, and escape the same way. By morning, the store owner would arrive to find a hole in the wall and everything gone. They pulled off dozens of these burglaries across Las Vegas and surrounding areas. They stole millions of dollars in jewelry, furs, electronics, and other goods. They had fences, people who buy stolen goods, who would pay cash. Spilotro was making enormous money from these operations. But there were problems. First, these burglaries brought massive police attention. The Las Vegas Police Department created a task force specifically to catch the hole-in-the-wall gang. Every burglary was investigated thoroughly. The FBI was watching too. Second, the burglaries violated Chicago outfit's orders. Spilotro was sent to Vegas to be invisible muscle protecting the casinos. Instead, he was making himself famous as a criminal. This brought the kind of attention that the outfit desperately wanted to avoid. Third, he wasn't sharing the profits with Chicago. This was freelancing, which was forbidden. All criminal operations were supposed to be approved and profits shared. The Chicago bosses were getting reports about Spilotro's unauthorized activities. They weren't happy, but for now, the casino skim was still flowing. So they let it continue. This was a mistake. They should have reined him in immediately, because Tony Spilotro was just getting started. The Nevada Gaming Commission maintained an official list called Excluded Persons, known colloquially as the Black Book. This was a list of people banned from entering a NY casino in Nevada. Forever, the Black Book was reserved for people the Gaming Commission deemed threats to the integrity of gambling. Mostly mobsters, known cheaters, and people with serious organized crime connections. In 1978, Tony Spilotro was added to the Black Book. This was catastrophic for his official role. He was supposed to be protecting the casinos for Chicago. How could he do that if he legally couldn't enter them? It was also publicly humiliating. Being in the Black Book meant the state of Nevada was officially declaring you a mobster. Your photo was distributed to every casino. Security guards were trained to recognize you and eject you if you tried to enter. For someone with Spilotro's ego, this was intolerable. His response? He ignored it. He'd enter casinos anyway. Sometimes using disguises, wigs, glasses, different clothes. Sometimes just walking in and daring security to stop him. This brought even more attention. Every time he was spotted in a casino and ejected, it made the news. The media loved the story. Mobster defies ban. Sneaks into casinos. The FBI loved it too. Every sighting was documented, photographed, added to their case file. The Chicago bosses were furious. Spilotro was supposed to be protecting their interests quietly. Instead, he was making headlines for defying the Gaming Commission. But the worst was yet to come. Through the late 1970s and early 1980s, bodies started appearing in the desert outside Las Vegas. People who crossed Tony Spilotro, people who owed him money, people who cooperated with police, people who knew too much. Some examples from the documented cases: Tamara Rand, 1975, a real estate developer who had disputes with Spilotro over property. Shot in the head in her home in San Diego. Spilotro was suspected but never charged. Sherwin Jerry, listener, 1979, a loan shark associate who was cooperating with the FBI, disappeared. Body found later in the desert. Shot execution style, William Action Jackson, 1961, Chicago. Tortured to death in a meatpacking plant. Spilotro wasn't the lead on this one, but he participated. Jackson was suspended on a meat hook and beaten for 2 days before dying. The list goes on. FBI estimates suggest Spilotro was responsible for 25 to 40 murders during his career. From Chicago through his Vegas years, the exact number will never be known. Some bodies were never found. Some deaths were ruled accidental or unsolved. What made Spilotro particularly dangerous was that he'd murder people over relatively minor issues. Someone insulted him at a bar. That person might end up dead. Someone owed him $10,000 they couldn't pay. Dead. Someone testified against an associate in a trial. Dead. Other mobsters were strategic about violence. They killed when absolutely necessary for business reasons. Spilotro killed when he was angry, which was often. This created a climate of terror around him. People were terrified to do business with him, because they knew any dispute might end in murder. But they were also terrified to refuse him, for the same reason. The FBI had multiple task forces investigating Spilotro. The Las Vegas police had dedicated units watching him. Every murder in Vegas, he was automatically a suspect. The heat was building to unsustainable levels. Here's something deeply disturbing about Tony Spilotro. While he was torturing and killing people in basements and burying them in the desert, he was also living as a suburban family man. He had a wife, Nancy, who by all accounts knew he was involved in some criminal activity, but didn't know the full extent. She believed he ran various businesses, some legitimate, some shady. She didn't know he was a serial killer. They had an adopted son, Vincent, who Spilotro genuinely seemed to love. He'd attend the kids' school events. He'd coach Little League. He'd take family vacations. Then he'd go torture someone to death in a basement. This compartmentalization, being a loving father and husband while being a remorseless killer, is characteristic of sociopathy. Spilotro could turn his emotions on and off. He could be charming and personable when it suited him. Then he could be utterly brutal without hesitation or remorse. People who knew him socially often described him as surprisingly nice, or funny, or generous. He'd tip well at restaurants. He'd help neighbors with home repairs. He'd donate to local charities. And then he'd murder someone for looking at him wrong. This made him even more dangerous. People would let their guard down around him because he seemed friendly. Then they'd realize too late that they'd crossed some invisible line. And Tony Spilotro didn't forgive crossed lines in Casino. Joe Pesci plays Nikki Santoro, the character based on Tony Spilotro. Pesci's performance is genuinely terrifying, violent, unpredictable, charismatic, and dangerous. And it's shockingly accurate. The movie shows Nikki as a short man with a Napoleon complex who overcompensates with extreme violence. That was exactly Tony Spilotro. The movie shows him starting unauthorized criminal operations that bring FBI attention. That's exactly what happened with the Hole in the Wall gang. The movie shows him being banned from casinos, but entering anyway. That's the Black Book story, accurately portrayed. The movie shows the head in a vice, torture scene. That's based on the M&M murders, though as mentioned. The reality was even worse than shown, but the movie slightly softens. The sheer number of murders. Casino shows Nikki killing several people. The real Tony killed dozens. Showing them all would have made the movie unwatchable. What the movie captures perfectly, the unpredictability. Pesci's Nikki can be charming and funny one moment, then explode into violence the next. That was Spilotro exactly. You never knew when he'd snap. Pesci actually met with some of Spilotro's former associates while preparing for the role. They told him stories about Tony's violence. Pesci later said some of the stories were so disturbing he couldn't include them in his performance because audiences wouldn't believe them. The real Tony Spilotro was worse than the movie could show. Tony Spilotro had a job. Protect the Chicago outfit's casino operations in Las Vegas, stay invisible, handle problems quietly. Keep the money flowing to Chicago. He was perfect for this job. His reputation for violence meant most problems could be solved with just a threat. People knew what happened to people who crossed him. The mere possibility of Tony's involvement was enough to keep most people in line. But he couldn't stay in his lane. He had to start his own operations. The Hole in the Wall gang. He had to become famous, getting into the Black Book, being in the news constantly. He had to kill people over personal grudges instead of just business necessities. His greed made him rich, but it also made him a massive liability. His ego made him feel untouchable, but the FBI was building a case piece by piece. And then he made the worst decision of his life. He betrayed his best friend. He had an affair with Frank Rosenthal's wife by the late 1970s. Frank and Jerry Rosenthal's marriage was in terrible shape. What had started as a transaction, he wanted a beautiful wife. She wanted security, had deteriorated into mutual misery. Jerry's alcoholism was out of control. She was drinking from the moment she woke up until she passed out at night. Bottles of vodka, hidden throughout the house. Pills to calm her anxiety. Pills to help her sleep. Pills to wake her up. Her behavior was becoming increasingly erratic in public. She'd show up at the casinos where Frank worked, drunk and loud, causing scenes. She'd get into screaming matches with him in front of employees, customers, anyone who happened to be there. She'd disappear for days at a time later. Everyone would find out she'd been on a bender with Lenny Marmer, her ex. Her pimp, the man she'd never stopped loving despite being married to Frank. Frank knew about these disappearances. His private investigators would report back. She's at this motel with Lenny. She's at this bar with Lenny. She's using drugs with Lenny. But what could he do? He'd tried controlling her money. She'd find ways to get cash anyway. He'd tried interventions. She'd agree to get help, then disappear again. He'd threatened divorce. She'd cry and promise to change. Then nothing would change. The 3 children were growing up in chaos. Robin, Jerry's daughter from Lenny, was a teenager watching her mother destroy herself. Stephen and Stephanie, Frank's biological children, were young but could see their parents hated each other. The household staff, nannies, housekeepers, drivers, essentially raised the children because Frank was working 16-hour days at the casinos, and Jerry was either drunk or missing. Frank's response to his failing marriage was to bury himself in work. He'd spend even longer hours at the Stardust, at the Fremont, at his other properties. Work was something he could control. His marriage was chaos he couldn't fix with intelligence or money. He was also becoming more paranoid about his work. The FBI was investigating him. The Nevada Gaming Commission had denied his gaming license and was watching him closely. The pressure was building from multiple directions. And into this dysfunction walked Tony Spilotro. Tony Spilotro and Frank Rosenthal had been friends since their Chicago days. They'd grown up in nearby neighborhoods. They'd both worked for the Chicago outfit, though in different capacities. Frank with his brain, Tony with his fists in Vegas. They'd worked together successfully for years. Frank ran the operations. Tony provided protection. It was a functional partnership built on mutual benefit and old friendship. But cracks were showing by the late 1970s. Frank disapproved of Tony's freelance criminal activities. The hole-in-the-wall gang burglaries were bringing FBI attention that threatened Frank's casino operations. Every time Tony made headlines for defying his casino ban or being suspected in another murder, it made Frank's job harder. Frank tried to tell Tony to dial it back, to remember why he was in Vegas, to protect the casino skim, not to build his own criminal empire. Tony didn't like being told what to do. Tony, meanwhile, resented Frank's success and legitimate power. Frank ran the casinos, met with celebrities, appeared on television. Tony was stuck being the muscle, the criminal everyone feared, but no one respected socially. It was classic tension between the brains and the muscle of an operation. Frank needed Tony's protection, but wished Tony would be quieter about it. Tony needed Frank's operations to justify his presence in Vegas, but resented being the subordinate partner. Their wives, Geri and Nancy, were friendly. They'd socialize together. The Rosenthals and Spilotros would have dinners, attend events together, spend time as 2 couples. This proximity, this social familiarity, created the opportunity for what happened next. The exact timeline of when Jerry McGee and Tony Spilotro began their affair is disputed in different sources. Some suggest late 1970s, some early 1980s. The specifics of how it started are also unclear. There are no direct eyewitness accounts of the beginning. What is documented through multiple sources including FBI surveillance reports, testimony in later trials, and accounts from people close to the situation, is that they definitely had an affair. Why did it happen? Let's understand each person's motivations. From Geri's perspective, she was trapped in a loveless marriage with a man who controlled her through money. Frank monitored her spending, tracked her movements, demanded to know where she was at all times. The more he tried to control her, the more she wanted to rebel. She was still in love with Lenny Marmer, but Lenny was an unreliable drug addict who gave her nothing but chaos. She needed him emotionally, but knew he wasn't viable long-term. Tony Spilotro represented something different. He was dangerous, genuinely dangerous, not just bad boy posturing. Jerry had always been attracted to dangerous men. That was Lenny's appeal, despite his obvious flaws. Tony was also powerful in a different way than Frank. Frank had money and business success. Tony had physical power, violent power, the ability to make people afraid. Some women are attracted to that kind of power. The affair was forbidden. Tony was Frank's best friend. This was the ultimate betrayal. And for Geri, someone who'd been rebelling against control her entire life, the forbidden nature made it more exciting. It was also revenge. Frank controlled her, monitored her, treated her like property. Sleeping with his best friend was the ultimate way to hurt him. From Tony's perspective, Geri was beautiful. She was one of the most beautiful women in Las Vegas. In a city full of beautiful women, Tony had an ego and wanted the best of everything. She was forbidden. She was his best friend's wife. Tony was a narcissist who believed he could take whatever he wanted. Rules didn't apply to him. The forbidden nature didn't stop him. It encouraged him. Betraying Frank gave Tony a sense of power. Frank was more successful, more respected, more publicly celebrated. But Tony could take something from Frank that Frank valued enormously: his wife. This was a way of asserting dominance. Tony also had a pattern of being sexually compulsive. Multiple sources document that he had various affairs and encounters despite being married. He saw women as conquests. Geri was just another conquest, though a particularly meaningful one, because of her connection to Frank. Neither of them seemed to think about the consequences. Geri was addicted and impulsive. Tony was a sociopath who didn't care about consequences. They both acted on immediate gratification without considering what would happen when Frank found out. And Frank would find out. In Las Vegas, everyone knew everyone. People talked. The outfit had eyes everywhere. It was only a matter of time. Frank Rosenthal discovered the affair through multiple sources, converging around 1979-1980. His private investigators reported seeing Geri with Tony in situations that were clearly romantic, not just social, meeting at hotels, extended time alone in apartments, physical affection that was obviously more than friendship. People talked. Vegas was a small community despite its size. Other mobsters knew. Casino employees knew. Word got back to Frank through various channels. Geri, during their fights, may have confessed, or at least admitted parts of it. Some sources suggest she told Frank about the affair during a particularly brutal argument, possibly while drunk or high. However Frank found out exactly, his reaction was volcanic rage. This was the ultimate betrayal. His wife, the woman he'd loved obsessively, the woman he'd married, despite knowing she didn't love him back, the woman he'd given everything to, was sleeping with his best friend, Tony Spilotro, the man he'd trusted, the man he'd worked with for years. The man who was supposed to be protecting him and his operations had stabbed him in the back in the most personal, humiliating way possible for someone like Frank Rosenthal, whose ego was enormous and whose need for control was pathological. This was devastating. What happened when Frank confronted Tony isn't fully documented. There are no recordings or transcripts of their conversation. but based on accounts from people connected to both men. Here's what likely occurred. Frank confronted Tony about the affair, demanded an explanation, demanded it stop immediately. Tony's response was essentially, "What are you going to do about it?" This was Tony Spilotro's personality in a nutshell. He didn't apologize. He didn't make excuses. He simply asserted that he'd do what he wanted, and Frank couldn't stop him, because what could Frank do? He couldn't fight Tony physically. Tony was a trained killer who would beat him to death without hesitation. He couldn't have Tony killed. Tony was protected by the Chicago outfit, and trying to kill him would result in Frank's own death. He couldn't go to the Chicago bosses and complain. That would make him look weak, unable to control his own wife. And the outfit valued strength. Weakness was death. All Frank could do was cut off contact with Tony and seethe with rage and humiliation. The friendship was over. The partnership was broken. The personal betrayal had destroyed any professional working relationship. But both men still had to operate in the same city, working for the same Chicago bosses, navigating the same criminal underworld. This created an impossible situation. Two men who now hated each other, both tied to the same organization, both trapped in Vegas with overlapping responsibilities. Something had to break. Frank Rosenthal filed for divorce from Geri in 1980. This triggered one of the most bitter divorce battles in Las Vegas history. Geri fought the divorce aggressively. Not because she loved Frank or wanted to save the marriage. Because she wanted the money. She'd been married to him for over a decade. She'd lived in luxury that entire time. She'd gotten used to the lifestyle, the mansion, the cars, the clothes, the jewelry, the spending without limits. A divorce meant losing access to Frank's wealth. She needed to secure as much money as possible in the settlement. The legal battle was brutal. Both sides hired expensive lawyers. Both sides made accusations. Both sides tried to destroy each other through the legal system. Frank's strategy: prove Geri was an unfit mother due to her alcoholism and drug addiction. Use this to win custody of Stephen and Stephanie. Robin was older and less of a custody issue. Prove Geri had been unfaithful, the affair with Tony, the ongoing relationship with Lenny. Use this to reduce alimony obligations. Limit her access to marital assets by claiming most of the wealth was earned before the marriage or through his individual efforts. Geri's strategy: claim she was entitled to half of everything accumulated during the marriage. This was potentially millions of dollars. Fight for custody of the children to leverage higher child support payments. Threaten to expose Frank's criminal activities if he didn't settle favorably. This was dangerous for her. The outfit didn't tolerate snitching, but she was desperate and not thinking clearly. The children were caught in the middle of this war. Stephen and Stephanie, elementary school age, were watching their parents fight viciously through lawyers and courts. The divorce proceedings exposed aspects of both their lives that they preferred to keep private. Frank's casino operations were examined. Geri's drug use was documented. The affair with Tony became public knowledge. The FBI was watching all of this with great interest. Divorces often expose financial information. Angry spouses sometimes cooperate with investigators. This was a potential opportunity to gather evidence on Frank's illegal casino operations. FBI agents approached Geri multiple times during this period. They tried to get her to testify against Frank about the casino skim. They tried to get her to testify against Tony about his murders and criminal activities. She refused, despite everything: the failed marriage, the addiction, the chaos. She followed Omerta closely enough to not cooperate with the feds. Or maybe she was too afraid of what the outfit would do if she talked. Either way, the FBI didn't get what they wanted from her. But they were patient. They were building cases against both Frank and Tony through other means. The divorce was just one piece of a much larger investigation. The affair and its aftermath had consequences far beyond the personal drama between Frank, Jerry, and Tony for the casino operation. Frank was distracted by his personal life. He was going through a divorce, dealing with betrayal, managing his rage at Tony. This distraction meant he wasn't paying as much attention to casino operations. He started making mistakes, small ones at first, but mistakes nonetheless. The kind of perfectionist attention to detail that had made him successful was slipping. The Skim operation required perfect invisibility. Any attention, any mistakes, any sloppiness could bring FBI scrutiny. Frank's personal drama was creating exactly the kind of attention they needed to avoid. For Spilotro's position, the affair was a violation of mob rules. You don't betray your friends, especially not made guys or people protected by the outfit. The code of loyalty was sacred. Chicago bosses heard about the affair. Added to Tony's growing list of problems: unauthorized burglaries, excessive murders, black book listing. Now betraying Rosenthal, Tony was becoming a liability. The outfit was patient because the casino skim was still flowing, and Tony's violence still served a purpose. But their patience had limits. For Geri, she'd lost her marriage to Frank, which meant losing her financial security. Tony wasn't going to leave his wife Nancy for her. That was never the plan. Lenny was still a drug-addicted mess. She was alone, increasingly addicted, with less money than she'd had before, facing custody battles over her children. Her spiral was accelerating. The affair hadn't given her freedom or happiness. It had just created more chaos. Movie vs. reality. The affair in Siasayo Casino depicts the affair between Ginger, Sharon Stone, and Nikki, Joe Pesci. The movie shows it accurately in its basic facts, but changes some emotional contexts. In the movie, the affair is shown as somewhat sympathetic to Ginger. She's desperate, addicted, trapped. Nikki is predatory, taking advantage of her vulnerability. Sam, De Niro, is portrayed as the betrayed victim. The reality was more complex. Geri was absolutely a victim of addiction and circumstance. But she also chose to have the affair, knowing it would destroy Frank. Tony was absolutely predatory, but Geri wasn't an innocent victim. She was an active participant. Frank was absolutely betrayed, but he'd also created an environment of control and mistrust that pushed Geri away. Everyone made bad choices. Everyone hurt everyone else. There are no heroes in this story. The movie captures the tragedy perfectly, even if it simplifies some motivations. Sharon Stone's performance shows Ginger's desperation, addiction, and self-destruction. Joe Pesci's performance shows Nikki's narcissism and predatory nature. Robert De Niro shows Sam's controlling personality and devastation at the betrayal. The emotional core of the triangle: obsessive love, Frank for Geri; addicted chaos, Geri; and narcissistic betrayal, Tony, is captured accurately, even if specific details differ. The affair destroyed the working relationship between Frank and Tony. Their friendship was over. Their professional partnership was broken. But they were both still in Vegas, both still working for Chicago, both still under FBI investigation, both still trying to maintain the appearance that everything was fine. This couldn't last. The tension, the hatred, the broken trust. It was all building toward an explosion. That explosion would come from multiple directions simultaneously. The FBI was closing in. The Nevada Gaming Commission was investigating. The Chicago bosses were losing patience. Geri was spiraling toward death. Tony was becoming more reckless. Everything that had been built over more than a decade, the casino empire, the Skim operation, the relationships, the illusion of control, it was all about to collapse. While Frank, Geri, and Tony were destroying each other personally, the FBI was methodically building a case against the entire Las Vegas casino Skim operation. The investigation had a code name, Operation Strawman. The name referred to Strawman, the people who officially owned the casinos on paper, while the mob secretly controlled them. This wasn't a new investigation. The FBI had suspected the Skim existed for years, but proving it in court was extraordinarily difficult. The mob was careful. They used layers of ownership to hide the true controllers. They kept minimal records. They intimidated witnesses. But by the early 1980s, the FBI had new tools and new techniques. Electronic surveillance. The FBI obtained court orders to place wiretaps on phones and bugs in hotel rooms, offices, and private homes. This was relatively new technology, becoming more sophisticated and easier to hide. They bugged the Stardust's counting rooms. They literally recorded the Skim happening, conversations about how much cash to take, who it was going to, when it would be transported. They bugged hotel rooms where Chicago bosses stayed when they visited Vegas. They recorded conversations about the operation, about Rosenthal, about Spilotro, about problems and solutions. They bugged phones in Chicago. The outfit bosses thought they were safe in their home city, talking on what they believed were secure lines. They weren't. The FBI was recording everything. Financial analysis. The FBI had accountants analyzing casino financial records. They were looking for patterns, times when reported revenues seemed suspiciously low compared to customer traffic, periods when cash counts didn't match expected amounts, discrepancies that suggested unreported income. They were comparing multiple casinos to see patterns across them. If 3 different casinos all showed similar accounting irregularities during the same time periods, that suggested coordination, a systematic skim operation. Informants. The FBI was flipping people. Lower-level casino employees who participated in the skim were approached. The agents would show them evidence of their involvement and offer a choice: cooperate and get immunity, or get indicted and face prison. Some cooperated. They provided detailed testimony about how the skim worked, who ordered it, where the money went. These informants were incredibly valuable because they could explain the mechanics of the operation from the inside. Patient surveillance. The FBI had teams watching everyone involved. They photographed people meeting. They tracked money couriers carrying cash from Vegas to other cities. They documented the network of who was connected to whom. This was slow, methodical work. It took years, but the FBI was patient. They knew if they rushed and made arrests too early, good defense lawyers would get the cases dismissed on technicalities. They wanted airtight cases. By 1980 to 1983, they had them. Remember, Frank Rosenthal had been running Vegas casinos without a gaming license since 1968. This was illegal, but proving he was actually in control versus just being a consultant was difficult. In 1976, he decided to apply for an official gaming license. This was extraordinarily risky, but necessary. The Nevada Gaming Commission was increasing pressure on unlicensed operators. The application process required extensive disclosure: financial records, employment history, known associates. Rosenthal hired the best lawyers and tried to present himself as a legitimate businessman who'd made some mistakes in his youth, but had reformed. His lawyers argued he was just a talented odds maker and casino consultant, nothing more. The Gaming Commission held hearings from 1976 through 1979. These hearings were public. Rosenthal had to testify. He was questioned about his connections to organized crime, his arrest record, his associates. He lied under oath repeatedly. Denied knowing certain mobsters he absolutely knew. Denied involvement in sports fixing that was documented. Claimed his relationship with the Chicago outfit was minimal. The FBI provided information to the Gaming Commission. They shared, without revealing classified sources, that Rosenthal was connected to organized crime and was likely running the casinos illegally. In 1979, the Nevada Gaming Commission officially denied Rosenthal's gaming license application. This should have ended his career in Vegas without a license. He legally couldn't work in any casino capacity. But he didn't stop. He just got more creative. He continued running the casinos through proxies. He'd give orders to people who officially held his former positions. Everyone knew he was still in control, but proving it was difficult. This illegal continuation of his work added to the FBI's growing case against him. Even while going through gaming license hearings, even while under FBI investigation, even while being publicly identified as connected to organized crime, Frank Rosenthal continued his television show. The Frank Rosenthal Show aired locally in Las Vegas. He interviewed celebrities, sports figures, and entertainers. He dressed in expensive suits, was charming and articulate, presented himself as a legitimate Vegas personality. This was insane from a criminal perspective. The entire strategy of the casino skim operation was invisibility. The mob bosses in Chicago needed Rosenthal to be unknown, forgettable, someone who could run operations without attracting attention. Instead, he was on television every week. He was a local celebrity. His face was on promotional materials. He was the opposite of invisible. The Chicago outfit bosses ordered him repeatedly to stop the show. He kept doing it. His ego, his need for recognition, his belief that he was smarter than everyone. It overwhelmed his survival instinct. The FBI loved it. Every episode was recorded. They analyzed his guests, his associates, his public statements. They used the show to build profiles of his social network. The show finally ended in 1979, but the damage was done. Rosenthal had spent years making himself famous when he should have been invisible. On October 4th, 1982, Frank Rosenthal finished dinner at a restaurant in Las Vegas. It was a normal evening. He walked to his car, a Cadillac Eldorado, in the parking lot. He got in the driver's seat, put the key in the ignition, turned it. A massive explosion erupted underneath the car. Someone had planted a car bomb. It was designed to kill him instantly. The explosion should have blown him apart. Instead, he survived. How he survived? The specific model of Cadillac Eldorado he was driving had a steel reinforcement plate under the driver's seat. This wasn't armor plating. It was just part of the car's structural design for that model year. Nobody, including Rosenthal, knew it was there. When the bomb exploded, the steel plate deflected most of the blast. The force went downward and outward instead of upward into Rosenthal's body. He was thrown from the car by the blast. He suffered injuries, burns, lacerations, the impact of being blown out of the vehicle. But he was alive. The car was destroyed. The parking lot was devastated. But Frank Rosenthal survived a bombing that should have killed him instantly. This was pure luck or fate or divine intervention. Depending on your perspective, there's no logical reason he should have survived. The bomb was powerful. The placement was correct. It was professionally done. But that random steel plate, part of the car's design, saved his life. Who ordered the hit? This was never officially proven. No one was ever arrested or charged, but there are two likely possibilities. Theory 1. The Chicago outfit. The most common theory is that the Chicago bosses ordered the hit. Why would they kill their own guy? Multiple reasons. He'd become a liability. His gaming license denial meant he couldn't legally run casinos anymore. His television show and public profile had brought unwanted attention. The FBI investigation was intensifying, partly because of his visibility. He knew everything about the skim operation. If arrested, he might testify to save himself. Better to eliminate him before he became a problem. This theory is supported by the professional nature of the bombing. Car bombs were a mob signature. The timing, just as FBI pressure was intensifying, makes sense. Theory 2. Tony Spilotro. Some sources suggest Tony Spilotro ordered the hit as revenge for the destroyed friendship and to eliminate competition for Jerry's affection. This theory is weaker because Spilotro needed Chicago's approval for such a significant action, and killing Rosenthal without permission would have signed Spilotro's own death warrant. However, Spilotro was reckless enough that he might have done it anyway. The most likely answer: Chicago ordered it, possibly with Spilotro's knowledge or even participation in the planning. Frank Rosenthal survived the car bombing, but he got the message. Someone wanted him dead, whether it was Chicago, Tony, or someone else. Staying in Vegas was suicide. He began cooperating with the FBI carefully, in limited ways. He provided some information about the casino operations in exchange for protection. He never fully testified, never became a witness in court, but gave enough information to help FBI investigations. This limited cooperation was strategic. He gave the FBI enough to protect himself, while not giving so much that the outfit would definitely kill him. It was a delicate balance. By 1987, Rosenthal left Las Vegas permanently. He moved to California, then later to Florida. He kept a low profile. He ran some small legitimate businesses. He never returned to the casino industry. He'd survived. Of everyone in this story, Frank Rosenthal was the one who escaped alive and free. But before he left, he had to watch even more tragedy unfold. After the divorce from Frank, finalized in 1981, Jerry McGee's life deteriorated rapidly. She lost custody of Stephen and Stephanie to Frank. The court ruled she was an unfit mother due to her addiction. This was devastating for her. Even though she'd been a largely absent mother due to her drinking and drug use, she had some money from the divorce settlement, but nowhere near what she'd hoped for. Certainly not enough to maintain the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to. Her affair with Tony Spilotro was over. Tony had never intended to leave his wife Nancy. Once the affair was exposed and became problematic, he ended it. Jerry was discarded. Lenny Marmer was still around, still addicted to drugs, still exploiting her for money when she had it. She had nothing, no husband, no children in her custody. No lover who cared about her, no career, no prospects. All she had was her addiction. She spent the divorce settlement money quickly. Drugs and alcohol consumed most of it. She moved to Los Angeles, living in increasingly cheap hotels and apartments as her money ran out. She tried to reconcile with Frank multiple times. She'd call him, beg for another chance, promise to get clean. He refused. The betrayal with Tony had been too much. Their marriage was truly over. She tried to see her children. Frank allowed supervised visits occasionally, but they were painful. The children barely knew her anymore. She was a stranger who showed up drunk and crying. By late 1982, she was living in cheap motels in Los Angeles, addicted to cocaine and alcohol, essentially waiting to die. On November 9, 1982, Geraldine McGee Rosenthal was found dead in a motel room in Los Angeles. She was 46 years old. The official cause of death: overdose. Cocaine and alcohol in lethal combination. The coroner ruled it accidental, but many people who knew her believe it was suicide. She'd attempted suicide before. She'd talked about wanting to die. She'd left a note, details never fully released, that suggested she knew this was the end. Whether it was technically accidental or intentional, the result was the same. Addiction killed her. From a beautiful showgirl who had Vegas at her feet to dead alone in a cheap motel room. From being married to one of the most powerful men in Las Vegas to dying with nothing. From having 3 children to dying estranged from them all. It's one of the most tragic falls in this entire story. Movie versus reality. Sharon Stone's portrayal of Ginger's death in Casino is remarkably accurate. The movie shows her dying of an overdose in Los Angeles. Alone in a cheap room. That's exactly what happened to Jerry McGee. The emotional arc of Stone's performance, from glamorous showgirl to desperate addict to dead, matches Jerry's real trajectory perfectly. If anything, the movie is slightly kinder to her than reality was. The movie shows her as more sympathetic, more clearly a victim of circumstance. The reality is that Jerry made choices that hurt people, manipulated people, used people. But she was also genuinely trapped by her circumstances, her addiction, and her damaged psychology. She deserved better than she got. She deserved help she never received. Her death was a waste of a life that could have been different if she'd been born into different circumstances. If she'd gotten proper addiction treatment, if the people around her had been less toxic. Instead, she died alone at 46. While Jerry was dying and Frank was preparing to leave Vegas, Tony Spilotro's problems were multiplying exponentially. The FBI heat, multiple FBI task forces were investigating him for the hole-in-the-wall gang burglaries. Several crew members had been arrested and were cooperating. Various murders. They had strong evidence on several cases. Extortion and loan sharking. Operations interstate transportation of stolen goods. Hadn't been indicted yet, but indictments were coming. The FBI was being methodical, building cases that would hold up in court. The police heat. Las Vegas Metro Police had dedicated units watching Spilotro. Every crime in Vegas, he was automatically a suspect. He couldn't operate freely anymore. The media attention. Spilotro was frequently in the news. Every time he was spotted in a casino, despite the Black Book ban, it made headlines. Every murder that matched his pattern got media coverage speculating about his involvement. This attention was the opposite of what the Chicago outfit needed. They wanted invisible operations. Tony was famous. The unauthorized rackets. Spilotro was still running operations without Chicago's approval. Burglaries that kept bringing police attention. Drug dealing explicitly forbidden by traditional mob rules. Loan sharking with excessive violence that created resentful debtors likely to cooperate with. Police extortion of legitimate businesses that made enemies. The relationship problems. His affair with Jerry was exposed, violating loyalty codes. His relationship with Rosenthal was destroyed, eliminating their operational partnership. He'd made enemies within the Vegas underworld through his excessive violence and freelancing. The casino Skim collapse. By 1984-1985, the FBI investigation had exposed the casino Skim operation. The casinos Tony was supposed to be protecting were under federal scrutiny. The Skim had stopped. The money flow to Chicago had dried up. Tony's primary job, protecting the casino operation, had failed completely. The operation he was sent to protect no longer existed. By early 1986, the Chicago outfit bosses held meetings about the Tony Spilotro problem. The discussions were documented through FBI wiretaps. Though the specifics of the murder order weren't recorded, the bosses were careful about explicitly ordering hits on recorded lines. But the conclusion was clear. Tony had to die. The reasoning? He'd failed at his primary mission, protecting the casinos. He'd brought excessive FBI attention through his unauthorized activities, violated loyalty codes. The affair with Jerry. He was about to be indicted and might testify to save himself. He knew too much about Chicago's operations, become more liability than asset. The decision was made. Tony Spilotro would be killed. But there was a complication. Tony had a brother, Michael Spilotro, who was also involved in criminal activities and also knew too much. If they killed Tony but left Michael alive, Michael might seek revenge or cooperate with the FBI. So the decision was expanded. Both brothers would die. The plan was simple. Lure them both to Chicago with the promise of promotions. Kill them both. Send a message to everyone else about what happens when you violate the rules. All they needed was to get the Spilotro brothers to Chicago. While Tony Spilotro's fate was being decided, the FBI's Operation Strawman was finally bearing fruit in court. Multiple trials began in 1985 and 1986. The Kansas City trial. This was the main Strawman trial. Defendants included Kansas City mob bosses who were receiving Skim money casino, executives who facilitated the Skim money couriers who transported cash various, associates who helped the operation. The FBI presented wiretap evidence, financial records, testimony from cooperating witnesses. The case was methodical and overwhelming. Convictions resulted. Multiple people sentenced to prison. The Chicago trials. Chicago outfit bosses were indicted for their role in the casino. Skim, Joey Ayupa, Chicago outfit boss. Jackie Chironi, underboss. Multiple other high-ranking members. The evidence was similar. Wiretaps. Financial analysis. Cooperating witnesses. Convictions again. Long prison sentences. Other related trials. Various other defendants across multiple cities faced charges related to the Vegas casino Skim operation. The scope was enormous. Dozens of people indicted, the majority convicted. The operation that had generated millions of dollars for organized crime over more than a decade was completely exposed and destroyed. Frank Rosenthal was never indicted. His limited cooperation with the FBI and his careful distance from the most incriminating aspects of the operation saved him legally. Tony Spilotro was indicted on various charges, but wouldn't live long enough to face trial. The empire was collapsing. The money was gone. The organization was decimated. And the final act of violence was approaching. In June 1986, Tony and Michael Spilotro received word from Chicago. The bosses wanted to meet with them. The message was that they were being promoted, given more territory, more responsibility, more respect within the organization. For Tony, this made sense in his narcissistic worldview. Despite all his problems, despite the heat from the FBI, despite the failing operations, he believed he was valuable enough to be promoted. His ego told him the bosses recognized his importance for Michael, who was less involved in the criminal operations, but tied to his brother, the promotion message was less clear. But if Tony was going, Michael would go too. Some sources suggest Tony was suspicious. He'd been in the life long enough to know that come to Chicago for a meeting could be a setup for murder. He'd lured people to their deaths himself using similar tactics. But he also believed he was too valuable to kill. The Skim operation might be dead, but he still ran profitable operations in Vegas. He still had his uses. Surely Chicago wouldn't kill their most effective enforcer. This is the narcissism of career criminals. They believe the rules apply to everyone else, but not to them. They've gotten away with so much for so long that they think they're untouchable. Tony Spilotro was about to learn he was wrong. On June 14, 1986, Tony and Michael Spilotro flew to Chicago. They told their families they'd be back in a few days. They were just going for business meetings. Nancy Spilotro, Tony's wife, had no idea her husband was about to be murdered. She believed he was a legitimate businessman with some criminal connections. She didn't know he was a serial killer. She didn't know he was about to die violently. Vincent Spilotro, their adopted son, was 12 years old. He said goodbye to his father, thinking he'd see him again in a few days. Tony and Michael never came home. The Spilotro brothers were picked up from the airport by associates. They were told the bosses were waiting at a house in Bensonville, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. This should have been the final warning sign. Real mob meetings happened in social clubs, in restaurants, in public places where business could be discussed, meetings in residential houses, especially in suburbs away from the mob's usual territory. were suspicious, but the brothers went anyway. The house belonged to a low-level associate. It was chosen specifically for this purpose, isolated enough that screaming wouldn't be heard by neighbors, disposable enough that it could be abandoned afterward. Tony and Michael walked in through the front door. They were told the bosses were waiting downstairs in the basement. They walked down the basement stairs. Waiting for them were approximately 10 to 15 men. Some sources say as many as 20. Mob soldiers, associates, enforcers, men who'd been ordered to kill the Spilotro brothers. The moment Tony and Michael reached the bottom of the stairs, the attack began. What happened in that basement is documented through several sources, FBI investigations. After the bodies were discovered, testimony from associates who later cooperated with authorities, forensic evidence from the bodies, information from mob insiders who knew the people involved. Attack. The moment the Spilotro brothers reached the basement, they were swarmed by the waiting men. There was no discussion, no explanation, no chance to fight back or escape. They were beaten with fists first, and with baseball bats, then with pipes and other weapons. Tony fought. He was a violent man who'd been in countless fights, but he was 5 feet 2 inches tall and outnumbered 15 to 1. There was nothing he could do. Michael was not a fighter. He was beaten down immediately. The duration. The beating lasted for an extended period. Conservative estimates suggest 20 to 30 minutes of sustained violence. Some sources suggest longer. They were beaten so badly that multiple bones were broken in both bodies. Their faces were pulverized beyond recognition. Internal organs were ruptured there. Was massive blood loss the cause of death? Some sources report they were beaten to death, meaning the trauma from the beating caused their deaths. Other sources report they were strangled while being beaten, meaning someone put ropes or hands around their necks and strangled them while others continued hitting them. The forensic evidence suggests both beating and strangulation occurred, so the exact sequence is unclear. Either way, the deaths were prolonged, painful, and brutal. Why so brutal? Several reasons. First, this was a message. The Chicago outfit was demonstrating what happens when you violate the rules. Tony had disobeyed orders, brought unwanted attention, betrayed his friend Rosenthal, and failed at his primary mission. This execution needed to be memorable. Second, many of the men in that basement personally hated Tony Spilotro. He'd been arrogant, difficult to work with, disrespectful. They took pleasure in killing him. Third, this was how mob justice worked. Traitors weren't given quick deaths. They suffered. Michael's tragedy. Michael Spilotro was not a major figure in organized crime. He ran some businesses, had some connections, but wasn't a serious criminal like his brother. He was killed because he was Tony's brother. He might seek revenge for Tony's murder. He knew too much about family business. So he had to die too. He was collateral damage. Wrong place, wrong family, wrong association. His death was arguably more tragic than Tony's, because he was less culpable, less involved, less deserving of mob justice. After the murders, the bodies were stripped naked. This was standard mob procedure. No identification, no clothes that might be traceable. They were loaded into a vehicle and driven to a cornfield in Enos, Indiana, approximately 100 miles southeast of Chicago. A grave had been pre-dug, shallow, maybe 2 to 3 feet deep, just deep enough to cover the bodies and make them not immediately visible from the surface. The two brothers were placed in the grave together, side by side, then covered with dirt. The killers left, expecting the bodies would never be found. Indiana has millions of acres of farmland. Cornfields are everywhere. Two bodies in a shallow grave in the middle of nowhere should have remained hidden forever. They were wrong. On June 22, 1986, 8 days after the murders, a farmer was plowing his field in Enos. Indiana. This was routine agricultural work. Preparing soil for planting, he noticed an area where the ground looked disturbed. The soil was different, fresher, looser, not matching the surrounding field. He investigated, started digging. Found clothing, then flesh. He immediately called the police. The Indiana State Police responded. They excavated carefully. Treating it as a crime scene, they found 2 bodies, badly decomposed after 8 days in the ground during summer heat. The bodies were so damaged, both from the beating and from decomposition, that visual identification was impossible. Fingerprints were too degraded. They had to use dental records. The dental records confirmed Tony and Michael Spilotro. This became instant national news. The Las Vegas mob enforcer and his brother, murdered and buried in an Indiana cornfield. It was sensational, shocking. Exactly the kind of story that captures media attention. The FBI immediately knew this was a mob hit. The Chicago outfit's signature was all over it. The lure to Chicago, the multiple attackers, the brutal beating, the cornfield burial. They investigated extensively. They interviewed dozens of suspects. Everyone claimed to know nothing. The problem with mob murder investigations. Omerta. The code of silence. Everyone involved knew talking meant death. The penalty for cooperating with police was the same treatment Tony and Michael received. Beaten to death and buried. So no one talked, no one testified. No witnesses came forward to this day, officially. The murders remain unsolved. No one has been charged. No one has been convicted. Everyone knows who did it. The Chicago outfit bosses ordered it, and their soldiers carried it out. But knowing and proving in court are different things. The statute of limitations has long since expired. Even if someone confessed today, they likely couldn't be prosecuted. The killers are either dead, in prison on other charges, or living freely. Justice, in the legal sense, was never served, although never officially proven. Evidence strongly suggests the following Chicago outfit bosses ordered the Spilotro murders. Joey, the clown. Lombardo, high-ranking Chicago mobster, had authority to order significant hits later, convicted of other murders in 2007. Died in prison in 2019 FBI wiretaps, placed him in discussions about the Spilotro problem. Tony Accardo, the ultimate authority in Chicago, outfit semi-retired by 1986, but still consulted on major decisions. To approve a hit, the significant never convicted of anything significant. Died in 1992 at age 86, Jackie Chironi. Underboss of Chicago outfit directly involved in Vegas casino operations, had personal reasons to eliminate. Spilotro, he'd failed at protecting the Skim, convicted in casino Skim trials. Died shortly after release in 1996. Joey Ayupa, official boss of Chicago, outfit at the time convicted in casino Skim trials, died in prison in 1997. These men, collectively, made the decision. They gave the order. Soldiers and associates carried it out. The murders happened with full organizational approval. This wasn't a rogue hit. This was official mob justice. For Nancy Spilotro, Tony's wife, was devastated. She'd been kept in the dark about most of Tony's criminal activities. She knew he was involved in some business that wasn't completely legal, but she didn't know he was a serial killer. Finding out her husband was murdered, then finding out through media coverage and FBI revelations what he'd actually done, was traumatic beyond imagination. She had to explain to their 12-year-old son that his father was dead, murdered, and also that his father had been a monster who killed dozens of people. She never remarried. She lived quietly in Las Vegas until her death in 1997. She was a victim of Tony's lifestyle, married to a murderer without fully knowing it, then left to deal with the aftermath and the shame. For Vincent Spilotro, the adopted son was 12 when his father was murdered. He had to grow up with the weight of that legacy. His last name was Spilotro. Everyone knew it. Everyone knew what his father had done. The murders, the torture, the violence. It was all public knowledge. He eventually wrote a book about his experience, trying to process the complicated feelings. He loved his father, but was horrified by what his father had done. He was a victim of his father's crimes, but also carried the burden of that name. He now runs a restaurant in Las Vegas. He's tried to build a normal life, despite the shadow of his father's reputation. For the Chicago outfit, the Spilotro murders sent a clear message. No one is untouchable. Even valuable enforcers who'd served for decades could be killed if they violated the rules. This had a chilling effect on the organization. People became more cautious, more obedient, more afraid. But it didn't save the outfit. The casino skim trials were already destroying the organization. Many of the bosses who ordered the Spilotro hit were themselves convicted and imprisoned within months. The murders were one of the last major acts of the Chicago outfit's Vegas era. After this, their power in Las Vegas was finished. For Las Vegas, Tony Spilotro's death marked a symbolic end of the mob's control of Las Vegas. Within a few years, the mob-connected casinos were sold to corporations. The old guard was gone, dead, in prison, or fled. The FBI and Nevada Gaming Commission had successfully cleaned the house. Modern Las Vegas is corporate-owned, heavily regulated, monitored by law enforcement. The mob has no significant power there anymore. The era that Rosenthal, Spilotro, and the Chicago outfit represented criminal control of major casinos was over. Movie vs. Reality. The ending of CSI Casino depicts the murders of Nikki and his brother, renamed Dominic in the movie, in its climactic sequence. The movie shows them being lured to a meeting, then beaten and buried alive in the cornfield. What the movie got right. They were lured to Chicago with promise of promotion. They were beaten by multiple attackers. They were buried in a cornfield in Indiana. The brutality was extreme. Both brothers died. Together, what the movie changed. The movie shows them being buried, alive, still conscious, struggling, while dirt is thrown on them. Reality. They were almost certainly dead before burial. Beaten, strangled to death first, then buried. The movie version is actually slightly less brutal in duration. The real beating lasted longer, but the movie version is more cinematically horrifying. Buried alive is viscerally terrifying. Why Scorsese made this choice, showing them buried alive, creates a more powerful visual and emotional impact. It's more horrifying for the audience to watch. The reality, beaten to death over 20 to 30 minutes then buried, would be too brutal to show in detail, and might desensitize the audience rather than horrify them. So Scorsese compressed the violence and added the buried alive element for dramatic effect. It's less accurate, but more cinematically effective. The core truth remains. The Spilotro brothers were murdered brutally by the Chicago outfit as punishment for Tony's failures and violations of mob rules. The survivors. What happened to AFDR Frank? Lefty Rosenthal, 1987 to 2008. Frank Rosenthal left Las Vegas permanently in 1987. He moved to Laguna Niguel, California, living quietly in an upscale community. Later, he relocated to Florida. He ran small, legitimate businesses, sports betting consultation, legal in his capacity, real estate investments, small ventures that generated income without attracting attention. He stayed completely out of the criminal underworld. Whatever limited cooperation he'd given the FBI was enough to keep him safe from prosecution. The government had bigger fish to fry. The Chicago bosses, the casino executives, the organized crime hierarchy. Rosenthal was never indicted, never arrested after the car bombing, never faced trial. The smartest one survived. He gave very few interviews over the years. When he did speak to the media, usually about the movie Casino, he was careful. He'd say the movie was mostly accurate, but wouldn't discuss specifics. He maintained to the end that he was just a businessman who got caught up in circumstances. This was laughable. He ran one of the largest illegal casino skim operations in history, but it was unprovable in court. The statute of limitations had passed on most crimes. The witnesses were dead or in prison. The evidence was old. He maintained relationships with some old Vegas associates, but mostly lived a quiet life. No more television shows, no more public profile, no more seeking recognition. He'd learned his lesson. Invisibility is survival. Frank Rosenthal died on October 13th, 2008. In Miami Beach, Florida. He was 79 years old. The cause was a heart attack. Natural causes. He outlived everyone else in this story. Jerry died.